I said, well, if I can do what for badgers what Bob Crow did for his union members, I'll be a happy man. So all credit to Bob. Right, Tom is our next speaker. Tom is a gentleman that lodged a complaint with the BBC about their coverage of the Irish badger cull and the case they were making to say that justified killing badgers in England, which Owen Paterson never loses an opportunity to put out in the media airwaves. Lord Luke Paterson has been missing for 6 weeks. He did turn up on Channel 4 the other day, and the first thing he said was, "You call badgers in Ireland, it proves it works." Well, I can tell you now that there is a recommendation, a ruling in the BBC saying that actually they got it wrong. Tom is the man who's managed to achieve that through a lot of diligent hard work through their very bureaucratic appeal system, which probably Bill and others are aware of, having worked in the BBC over the years. But the BBC are sitting on that. They're not actually issuing it. They won't issue it until the 25th of March, and that raises serious questions about what I feel and others as government influence over the process. So Tom's going to bring us up to speed, tell you a bit about his interest and background in this, and why it's so important we get to the truth from that BBC ruling.
Thank you, Dominic. Brian May is not alone with the questionable treatment that he received in the hands of the BBC breakfast 2 weeks ago. I'm here to tell you about my experience with the BBC over the last year and a half as a biologist and wildlife animal policy worker. And I'm not here to bash the BBC, but to find out the truth about what's been going on. In September 2012, before the postponement of the Gloucestershire and Somerset culls, BBC's Newsnight interviewed members of the public intending to monitor or to disrupt the cull. NFU's president, Peter Kendall, attacked the BBC for being biased, inaccurate, misleading. He said it was symptomatic of the BBC's general biased coverage of the cull. The BBC, as far as I'm concerned, was kicked for doing its job. After this, something happened that only now we're piecing together. It looks like someone had much more than a little word with the BBC. I'd like to tell you a bit about Ireland and the BBC. Culling in the Irish Republic between 1983 and 2012 has killed 6,000 badgers a year, over 97,000 badgers, costing over £120 million. They all but eradicate badgers in the Irish Republic, fill skips with them. But it's been done within a system where the drop in BTB from culling badgers can't be measured. In Ireland, a four areas project between 1997 and 2002, in the 4 areas, Cork, Donegal, Kilkenny and Monaghan, coincided with the extensive CREB trials here, but with much poorer science content. No study of perturbation effects, no controls, no allowance for changing herd size or improved TB testing that was by then underway. Over this period, the number of cattle, the Irish herd size declined by about 13%. But also everywhere over this period in Ireland, better cattle BTB testing and isolation methods brought a further 30% decline in BTB across the whole country, not just the 4 cull zones, just as seems to be happening now in Wales. The important fact is that BTB decline had not been scientifically attributed to the Irish eradication policy. But Ireland is where last year the National Farmers Union and Paterson quoted defiantly that BTB declines from badger culling originate. But it is the data taken out of context. There is no scientific evidence that killing contributed. But the UK government and the NFU spotted how the Irish were operating, and they liked it. They liked the culling aspect for reasons I don't fully understand. It fitted with their ideas. And crucially, who was it that decided to use a spike of bovine TB in Ireland in 1999 as the starting point in a dodgy graph to present downward picture of Irish BTB from culling? 3 guesses. Well, it seems to have crossed the water in spring 2013 into the pages of the Farmer's Guardian, following a visit to Ireland by, 3 guesses, the NFU. Hot on their heels, the BBC sent to Ireland their science and environment correspondent David Kumar, no doubt in close contact with the NFU, where, for a new BBC News report going everywhere that I then complained about, he interviewed an Irish farmer who knew nothing about BTB, quoting second-hand a wrong impression of the badger cull, its results, and BTB spread in Ireland. The views expressed in Kumar's interview happened to support exactly what NFU and Paterson had been saying. Kumar did a short interview with the Irish Wildlife Trust, who do fantastic work with very few resources. Give them some support if you can. But what did he do? He chose to emphasise the lack of public concern in badger eradication in Ireland. His finishing statement to the public on this matter was, you can apply the lessons from the Irish Badger Cull to what is about to happen in England. Scandalous. Scandalous. It was almost as if the NFU and Patterson had written that script. Kumar even went on in his BBC Online blog to question the probity of the 300,000 signatures that we made in England against the Cull. He seemed to be looking biased in favour of the Cull. So the BBC's approach troubled me. Was it just bad luck, a complex story being mistold? Was the journalism just clumsy and ill-informed? Were the BBC overcompensating for their telling off with Newsnight? Was the BBC element unwisely playing to the farming gallery, saying what they thought the pro-Cull wanted to hear? Did the BBC see pitching farmers against protesters with the police in the middle as a good story? Or was there a more sinister thing going on? Was it just possible there'd been handling by other pro-Cull interests or some other political force, seeking the weakening of laws controlling the worst excesses of rural blood sport, as has been mentioned earlier, and for an open access return to killing what you want, where you want and how you want? When the same pro-Cull material appeared on the BBC's online webpage on 13th of May last year, how did the Irish Badger Cull play out? I was more than ready to make a formal complaint to the BBC. Then in the run-up to the Cull, the Sunday afternoon BBC Country File covered the Cull, stating its controversial nature, but skirting around the flawed science base of the Cull proposal and the Irish misinformation. Several editions of Countryside, and I watched them all, covered it in an unsatisfactory way. The programme just before the 2013 Cull involved NFU's president, Peter Kendall again, who claimed 70% of badgers culled would bring 30% reduction in BTB, whereas the Krebs report suggested up to 16% after 9 years. The public were wrongly left with the idea that the culling was the right approach, and the public opinion is very, very important, as you all know. This was the final straw, and in autumn last year I made multiple complaints to the BBC. Despite the common problem, the BBC refused to join my complaints together with its common cause and made me deal with each complaint piecemeal. They rejected my complaints at every hurdle. I was forced into repeated appeals and submissions, but finally in December last year, the first complaint arrived at the BBC Executive and the BBC Trust itself, Chris Patton's BBC Trust. The BBC Trust said they would make a final ruling in January of this year and then ratify and release their judgment to me in February this year, nearly 6 months after the alleged offences. So in February, I was told that my complaint in respect of David Kumar and the Irish Cull claims had been upheld in part, but in my view, on the key point of misused science, and I checked this with many people entirely. I was given an embargo deadline for the release of what they clearly told me was a ratified judgment last Thursday, 6th of March. But they had not released that ruling, that their ruling was the basis of all my complaints and effectively would lead them, the BBC, to concede all of them. At the end of February, I invited the BBC to take David Kumar's offending reporting, which is still online, and to make retractions, starting with the truth, and to make broadcast with equal prominence. BBC said they would think about it. Then, last week, on Wednesday, in the normal way, and respecting the journalist protocol, which I work with a lot, I circulated the ratified judgment with an embargo for Thursday morning to a few press contacts. But then the BBC emailed to say they were calling the announcement off. Then they had a go at me in an email, said they would no longer communicate with me in the usual way about what was now somehow what they called a draft decision. I wonder why. Is it a coincidence that this cancellation of BBC's errant ways was done when the exposure of the failure of the 2013 is freshly leaked? Am I sure that the BBC's stance has been deliberate rather than the BBC simply being duped by smart operators? Well, I have my suspicions, and I call on the MPs in this House and others to find out what's going on in the BBC, if it's a conspiracy and a cover-up, then we need to know. But I know about the deception and spin in this matter. I know enough about it to say shame on Cameron and Clegg and the Coalition, shame on Patterson, shame on Eustace, Kendall and the NFU. You disgust me and those who bend facts and disrespect science and our wildlife. You are a disgrace to this country, and it shows your contempt for the environment. Yes. And as for the BBC, you know, I'm still not quite sure. Unwitting stooges or part of the act? BBC, you had better throw some light on this. You have a chance now to put things right. You were hit for broadcasting anti-Cull feelings by Kendall before the Cull. Did you overcompensate? Or were your arms twisted? We need to find out. The BBC's Gregory Kumar might know. For the sake of Badgers, we want the truth. And BBC, it is your duty to broadcast it now. Thank you.